Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Robinson, or the Play Typer Guy, as my son calls me. I'm excited to welcome Jamie Lynn Crofts. She's my colleague at Wonkette, and also she does policy work in Wisconsin. And she's going to help me kind of walk through the many indictments against former president and ongoing national security threat Donald Trump. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, it's always great to get to talk to you.
So, with your background, your experience, could you just kind of walk us through the latest charges against him? When we're recording this at this time, because there's always an indictment coming up. Um, DA Fannie Willis in Georgia had just smacked Trump, Rudy Giuliani, who I also loathe, and some other of their thugs and goons, with like multiple counts for attempting to overthrow the government and overturn specifically the election results in Georgia. Um, and this is sort of not it's not a free speech issue, which is what I've been seeing. So can you speak to that a bit?
There's been a lot of kind of hay made by your usual Trump supporting suspects about the fact that like tweets and speech that would otherwise be protected is, listed throughout this newest indictment. Those people clearly do not understand how RICO and racketeering laws and charges work. Um, an overt act in furtherance of a racketeering conspiracy does not need to be illegal on its own. That is like the whole thing that underlies RICO laws. This is why RICO laws exist, so that when people are engaged in this conspiratorial work, even if each individual thing isn't a crime, if it's part of a criminal enterprise, it can be prosecuted. So, yes, a lot of the things that are listed in there, such as some of the tweets and whatnot, may otherwise be protected speech, but that does not mean that they can't be part of a RICO prosecution. That's just how this type of law works and functions and has always worked and functioned, including when Rudy Giuliani was using it to go after people in the mob.
And that's a great example because Trump is a mob boss. Like
Oh,
that's
absolutely.
and how he pressures people. Um, the stuff he did with Pence, where it was clear violence, um, and inciting a mob against Pence. All of this is textbook, and people like Giuliani. I mean, granted, Giuliani was tied up into it, but people who prosecute crimes, and you were generous enough to say that there are people who don't know how RICO works, but obviously Giuliani does, Lindsey Graham does, others. You know, mobster, anyone who watched The Godfather, they don't say, "Hey, go put a horse in this guy's bed." They say certain things that give them a sort of plausible deniability, and you break that by going down the line and finding folks who will then flip, which is what Willis has done so well. Also, the idea that, I mean, Lindsey Graham is from a state where I'm sure someone has either been given life or perhaps even executed for driving a getaway car. And I don't think that you could just give the Uber defense. It's like, I
Right.
was just picking my buddies up. What? Like, no, no, no. That is clear in furtherance of a crime. Um, it does seem, because it's so very long ago, Jamie, and you're in Wisconsin, just one of the states Trump tried to steal. Like
Yep.
there was no he lost multiple lawsuits, and a lot of these cases were not close. They like to frame it as Wisconsin was close. I mean, Marjorie Greene tried to challenge Michigan on January 6th, which was like more than 200,000 votes. Like, it was just absurd. I mean, Biden wasn't challenging North Carolina, and there was just as much like, oh yeah, there was fraud, and I really won North Carolina, and I really won these states. It was sort of this own sort of carve out for Trump. So you couldn't get Sarah Gideon saying, "Oh, there was fraud in Maine. I really won." Like, no, like you need to actually prove this, right? and there was no legally having followed this, especially in Wisconsin, there was no. It was all a pretense for the scheme, right?
Oh yeah, it was completely ridiculous. And there's even a law firm that I will not name drop because I don't like it when people go to their pages, but they are very conservative. They're terrible. They go after like everything good that anyone tries to do in this state. And even they did like an analysis of the 2020 election in Wisconsin where they were like, yeah, Joe Biden won. Like Trump paid for recounts in the only parts of the state where people who aren't white live, and Joe Biden's margin actually increased after those recounts by a very small margin. And like, yeah, so, Biden won Wisconsin by a little over 20,000 votes. And it's like, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, that is pretty close. It's still 20,000 votes. It's not like we're talking about if one or two things were accidentally miscounted by a machine that it would make a difference, like you sometimes see in, state legislative races and that kind of thing. But no, we went over and over and over everything here. Although I will say that I am very thankful that we are going to have a state Supreme Court here in Wisconsin that is stacked a little bit differently for when this kind of thing happens after 2024, which I'm sure it will if Trump is the candidate again. Um, because, we were one vote shy of Trump's trying to steal the election in Wisconsin lawsuit actually proceeding. And
Mm.
it was thanks to Justice Hagedorn, who I like to call Wisconsin's very own John Roberts, who is a conservative, but on certain issues, actually cares about the institution a little bit more than some of his MAGA brethren.
And Willis, and Jack Smith has as well in a separate case, specifically in Florida, lays out how Trump was starting to kind of, and with Roger Stone even, well before the election, was just, we're going to stay in power forever. This is something you had noted well before the 2020 election, and I'm sure a lot of the quote unquote adults in the room, Democrats out there, were telling you you were wrong and that wasn't going to happen, but you predicted that he would not leave. He would just declare fraud and try to stay in office, which is what happened.
Yeah, I actually had that concern before the 2016 election that he wouldn't concede. Of course, it's slightly different when you're not talking about an incumbent president, but I was very worried about that before the 2016 election because, when the election hasn't even happened yet and one of the major candidates is already saying that there's voter fraud, I mean, that pretty much tells you where they're willing to go with that type of thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
In 2016, there was definitely the threat of violence, sort of a January 6th issue occurring if he had lost and pushed the fraud narrative. But as you say, with a sitting president, I mean, there were talks of imposing the Insurrection Act using the implication that once they stole the election, there'd be protests. And we saw this in, 2020 with Black Lives Matter. One person somewhere knocks out a window and Democrats ran hiding. Oh no. And so don't do that. So essentially he would have used any, you know, sense of violence. And again, like the Supreme Court, right? Where people were protesting in the neighborhood they lived outside of Kavanaugh's home and others when they're losing actual rights, and even that was seen as too scary. Oh no, you are threatening these nice people. And so they were going to sort of leverage that and essentially maintain a status quo while they're in office, and that was sort of the power of the presidency that he had. But going back to his specific scheme, 20,000 votes in Wisconsin is not, if you look at presidential margins, not that not that narrow, even 10,000. In the 2000 election, we focus on Florida, but there are other states that Gore lost far narrowly, like New Hampshire, which had at the time, a Democratic governor. He could have easily got on the phone with them and said, hey, yeah, fraud, please give me the election. There's all this focus on what Trump believed. So it's either like, well, if he fired Krebs, the guy who told him there was no fraud, and he ignored multiple lawsuits that he lost and ignored everyone telling him, and even in his own attorney general, Bill Barr, who would have gladly tried to find something, said there's no fraud. So then it's like, okay, well, then now either he's mentally ill and should not be president under the 25th Amendment, or he's just ignoring, like, he clearly wants to do criminal intent. I just don't know why we're pursuing the idea of what his. I know legally we might have to, right? But clearly he knew he lost. He was not interested in what the actual results were. And he was just because he wasn't actually arguing on specific. Because I want to ask you about this. So his cronies, Josh Hawley and then Ted Cruz, when they were sort of trying to enable the coup, they were talking specifically about rules changes regarding mail-in voting and so forth, specifically in Pennsylvania, um, that shouldn't have happened, even though, again, that had gone up to the state Supreme Court and said, yeah, it was fine that they made this change or whatever. So that was the law. But um, that was still on an issue. So when people talk about Hillary Clinton or Stacey Abrams, they recognize reality. Like, so, and even Gore. So he's saying, yeah, the Supreme Court should have continued the voting. I get that they didn't. I lost. Hillary Clinton's like, yeah, I actually won the popular vote. That's weird. Why is this a thing? But I lost. I can see Stacey Abrams. Well, I ran against the guy overseeing the election, and that's effed up. And he threw out people off the voters' rolls, and I could have won. I did not, but I understand that I didn't. But Trump, if you look at what he says, he does not exist in a world where he actually lost, even by the rules that he disagrees with. He keeps saying that he won by hundreds of thousands of votes in Georgia, right? Like and in
Yep.
Wisconsin. Um, so that, I don't know, does that make any difference as to his state of mind or anything, or is it just like he's just delusional and can't accept defeat?
And I haven't looked deeply into these charges and which ones would require, a specific mens rea on his part. I think some do require intentionality. I don't think that all of them do. And if, it does, if there is an intentional standard, then, state of mind is going to be part of it. But you're also going to be looking at all of the evidence surrounding that, including the things, as you just mentioned, like, people on his campaign and some of the lawyers, even some of the lawyers who have been indicted, telling him, like, this is not true. For example, one of the things in the Georgia indictment was about Trump signing one of the legal filings as true when it was just blatantly false. And Eastman had actually said, you shouldn't sign this. And Trump did anyway. And then Eastman filed it anyway. And so I think that even where intentionality is going to be a part of it, it's going to be hard to refute all of the facts that we know were available to him just from these indictments. And there's more that's not included in these indictments as well. And yeah, at what point when, everyone aside from a couple of people who, Trump himself in private called crackpots, like Sidney Powell, when literally everyone else is saying this did not happen, at what point do we just have to say, yeah, he knew? Because to anyone else paying attention and looking at the evidence, it was pretty clear.
Yeah. And again, with Stacey Abrams or Al Gore, they are disagreeing with, rules or legal decisions, which again is First Amendment protected. They then conceded. They did not try to block or otherwise have the election thrown their way. But most specifically, because Trump can't accept that he lost, that like the people rejected him, so he has to imagine that he won. It does lead to these dramatic, um, almost absurd kind of conspiracies, and it involves having to claim that the other side, we talked about rigged or whatever, essentially stole an election, which leads to people like Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss being harassed and targeted, because the only way it works is that someone committed this larger crime, which sets them up for harassment and death threats, which is obviously unforgivable, and they should, rot in prison just for what they did to those women. But uh, there was even more than just them, like people, um, elected officials in Michigan, again, a state that was not even close, harassed and so forth. So, the idea that this is all First Amendment protected is just, insulting. It's clear that he tried to steal an election. It was a coup. He did it right up to January 6th. Even during the attack, he was still trying to steal the election. Uh, and I also want to ask you, so his whole theory of the case is that he will still say that it's rigged. How does that help him? Like, presumably, maybe a lawyer will keep him from testifying or whatever. But his whole argument is lie stuff that, if you were watching, they specifically were trying, lawyers specifically trying not to ever. They would say stuff publicly, but never say it in front of a judge or under oath. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately for the lawyers, some of them did file things with blatant untruths in them that they might now have to respond or hold some responsibility for. Uh, no even remotely decent lawyer would allow him to testify in any of these cases. Can you imagine opening that up to cross examination? And there are also certain types of things uh, that generally can't be brought up in criminal trials, like other bad acts unrelated to what's currently going on. But someone if the lawyer asks questions or the defendant responds in ways that allude to their trustworthiness or something like that, then that also opens up the door on cross-examination for stuff not just related to the substance of this particular case, but all of the other terrible things that he's done. So I can't imagine any lawyer putting him on the stand, although and it so far in the other in the civil litigation, they've been pretty successful at stopping him from testifying.
Hmm.
uh, and we'll kind of see if that continues to be the case or not.
Yeah, for my Law and Order memories, obviously, because I have a, uh, gotta love my McCoy, Jack McCoy. He would do something where, he can't introduce this evidence, but he manipulates the defendant into saying something easily rebuttable that he can rebut. So, like, I'm actually a great husband, and then
Yep.
they can introduce, like, well, actually, here's where you beat your ex-wife or something, which you could not have normally introduced. And so that's somewhat rooted in reality. They can sort of, and Trump would create so many opportunities. He doesn't exist in a world where he could be cross-examined, and he's not even showing up for a debate. We're taping this for during the week of debates. It seems that he is not appearing. He could have. You never know with this guy, but
I would love it if he didn't come to Milwaukee right now, personally. I'm like, oh no. But yeah.
um, and when reading about this coup, Jamie, I want to ask you. So, it why wasn't he impeached when he refused to concede the election and literally blocked the peaceful transfer of power? Which is not just like a friendly thing of where, hey, let me invite Jamie over to the house and we shake hands and that sort of thing. It's like, well, no, there's actual important stuff that happens when teams are allowed to have the transition, and he blocked it for so long that it is a national security threat. I think people have linked that to challenges of Afghanistan, one of the largest. And of course, if you'll recall, there was a global pandemic at the time and the vaccine rollout. So the idea of treating this as him having a temper tantrum, one, it wasn't true because he was productively trying to steal the election. And but and I go back and I've gotten some heat from this because I alluded to this in an article I wrote for Wonkette, but it just felt like Democratic leadership had the perception that everything was going to be all right. It was like, just ignore him and he will eventually go away and Joe Biden will be president. But that almost did not happen, right? Like, so what's your thoughts on this?
Right. I mean, part of it was, I swear, both Democrats and Republicans, people at the DOJ who were not trying to overthrow the election, like Jeffrey Clark, they had their heads in the sand for far too long. I mean, like, as you mentioned at the beginning of this, most of the things that happen, we've learned about some new truly horrific things since then, like accessing voter machines illegally and whatnot. But most of this happened like in full view of the public. We knew about like the call to Kemp to find those votes, and all of the other efforts to just try to overturn an election. And I think that part of it is that still, like, the powers that be have not adjusted to this kind of new political landscape that we live in. We discovered under Trump how many of the things that we've always relied on to kind of protect our system are based on unwritten, unenforceable norms that people just followed and that we expected our politicians to follow. I mean, there were so many things that, Trump said and did in the run up to the 2016 election that with previous candidates would have completely disqualified them, even late in the process. Things that people resigned over in years preceding. Um, and I think that's part of why it was hard, I think, for some of the, powers that be in our institutions to really even accept that it was an illegal and a coup attempt until, it really escalated on January 6th, because they were, just writing it off as, oh, it's, it's just someone complaining. We've never had an issue with peaceful transition of power, not since the Civil War. It's fine. Clearly, it wasn't fine. I was so happy when first the federal suit and now this one. I'm even happier about this one thanks to some little Georgia law specifics going on there. Um, but like, it was so important to me that these type of serious charges be brought against him and also some of his top co-conspirators, because they tried to throw a coup.
Yeah.
And
You need to make a situation where that's more unpleasant than trying to stop it. Because I said at the time, a lot of the Republicans who did the right thing, and it wasn't something that Democrats stopped. Bluntly put, it was stopped because of Republicans, specifically Raffensperger, even Kemp, Doug Ducey in Arizona, Liz Cheney, who actively worked against it in the House. There was enough, but it meant a lot at the time that she was like, this is BS, and released a statement saying BS. But these people, her political career ended. Raffensperger's reelected, Kemp was reelected, but other people, Kinzinger is gone, and other people it looked as if, oh, well, doing the right thing actually isn't politically wise, and the folks who did are still free. So, especially I think it means a lot that even if, and we hope, and we can discuss a bit later, that Trump and Julian don't get away. But to me, the fact that people like Jenna Ellis or Eastman or Powell might be busting blocks for a living, or, losing everything, uh, will prevent this from occurring again. And something to your point, though, when you talk about the norms and everything, I always feel like in the mob, if you watch the mob movies, it's understood of like, well, we don't kill the families of mobsters, but not out of the goodness of their heart. It's understood that I don't do that because then my family's at risk, and then we just can't do business. It's like, but if it's sort of whereas, oh, well, I just, Jamie's family knocked off my family. Oh, well, I can't retaliate because then our norms and rules, then it's like, okay, well, I'm a chump, and you're just gonna like continue, you're just gonna escalate and root me out. Because the whole talks, I mean, Republicans are defending Trump and saying, oh, everything he did was okay. We all know that they're not going to accept the scenario in 2024 5 or 2024, where Joe Biden does not concede. It's like, oh no, I won Ohio. What are you talking about? There's no evidence. Like, what? No, I won Ohio. It was fraud, or not. They didn't let they don't let black people vote in sufficient numbers in Florida. So I reject the result, and my vice president will return the results or submit fake electors, and that's okay. And I'm still president. Like, Republicans know that, one, Democrats won't do that, but also, if there's even any talk, if he lost and there's a sort of a finite window, and then he would be impeached, it would be like the hammer would fall. And if you aren't going to be willing to do that, it just, again, you look like a chump.
Yeah. It it's just, these last few years, and I'm not naive enough to think that, like, oh, politics as we had them were fine. Let's go back to the good old days of the white boys in the country club hanging out together and making their decisions while they smoke cigars. Um, what all of this taught me was, first of all, there are a whole lot of things we need to change about the way that our political system works. I am thankful that they, in a bipartisan way, were able to make the Electoral Reform Act into law, because that will hopefully stop the particulars of, like, we can just submit our own fake electors, that part of it ever happening again. Uh, but you're right. I mean, at the same time, and I think part of this is, that Trump and some of the people around him get that Democrats would never resort to the types of things that he's doing. And so it really doesn't matter. And he's perfectly happy to do whatever will keep him in power, or what he thinks might keep him in power. And no, like, Democrats aren't going to play this game. They're just simply not. And we rightly would not support them if they tried to overturn an election.
Mhm.
Like, as much as I wanted to stop Trump from becoming president after the 2016 election, he won an election. I wasn't trying to get Hillary Clinton to go storm the Capitol and throw a coup.
Yeah.
you know it's this world where it's this situation. We've talked about this multiple times before, you and I have, that what one team, they were in a basement playing chess. Republicans set the room on fire, and Democrats are sitting at the chessboard arguing about the rules of chess still. And unfortunately, that's still where we are right now. Hopefully, if there's some sort of accountability, particularly for some of the lawyers and advisors and former DOJ officials involved, maybe that will at least deter people who aren't Trump in the future. But he still somehow finds lawyers to support him, despite the fact that they all get disbarred or go to prison. So,
Someone has to finish at the bottom of the class, Jamie. So yeah, and it's a very curious response from, I think, the position from the Democratic Party, and it's coming from the Biden team, I've heard, is to not even talk about the fact that his likely opponent staged a coup and has multiple indictments facing him, because, oh, you don't want to look as if you're feeding the right wing narrative that Biden is personally prosecuting his political opponent, but he's not, and they're lying about it anyway. And it is relevant to mention that my political opponent tried to end democracy, like literally end democracy, ignored the results of an election, tried to steal the election, um, and essentially with it resulting in violence. So that should probably be mentioned, but apparently the idea is that let's not mention that.
yeah. And, I really thought that the delay after January 6th, before the House actually impeached, it was like, we're going to wait until the House comes back into session to impeach him, instead of, like, I'm sorry, no, you call everyone back, like, the next fucking day and you impeach the motherfucker. Sorry, you impeach the person. We're not at Wonkette, so I won't swear. But Sorry, I'm having an ADHD moment here. But yeah, like I did think that that was a failed opportunity, a missed opportunity, because in the first few days after January 6th, that was the moment that Democrats had and that people who care about democracy had. Because overall, apart from like the few really, really hardline MAGA people, even people who voted for Trump for a couple days there, a lot of them were pretty horrified by January
Mhm.
6th, what had happened. It was an attack on our country, and a lot of people saw it that way. And the longer time that elapsed, and the more that people were able to, just listen to the Ted Cruz's and Josh Hawley's and Donald Trump, it started to be minimized and just talked about as, this thing that happened. And people were upset, and things happen when people are
Yeah.
upset. And, the exact type of language they would never use for a protest that involved people who weren't 99% white. Um, and
It isn't seize on the moment. Um,
no,
and there's often that sense of a lack of aware, and this is, I would say, from liberals across the spectrum. I see this here in Portland, an unawareness that people are conspiring against you. So I see this in Portland where it's like, oh, we're going to, unveil our decriminalization of drugs here. And it's like, okay, well, I support that, but you've got to do it, and it's got to go off without a hitch, because just if it doesn't, it's going to be exploited by the people who want to kind of have the hard line, and it will be actually worse than doing anything. And it just seems like it doesn't register that people are going to seize on your either inaction or your mistakes. And I think what occurred was, um, they let that amount of time, as you say, elapse, and it really was, you needed to go right that, in fact, not let anyone home. It's like, what they say about corporate, uh, business deals, right? Like, you don't let people even go to the bathroom, right? Like, you have it so that it's so tense. Like, okay, fine, I really need to pee, so all right, I sell the company, right? If you let someone go home, they're gonna be, oh, do I really want to take that price? I'll talk to someone else. You want to keep it, and so yeah, it never. No one should have been let home. There should have been tons of pressure on to do something, um, and and that's something that Republicans are very good at doing, seizing their advantage, pressing the advantage. Um, it's a slight digression, but it's sort of something we're seeing now, with Tommy, Tuberville, who's have the holds on military promotions, and the response from people like Schumer and your favorite person, Dick Durbin, uh, is that, well, what can we do? It's up to Republicans to do something, which is like, but you're in charge. I just don't. People don't. The average person outside of DC, outside the Beltway, they just, I put someone in charge to be in charge, and so what? You don't have power. You can't do anything. Like, why can't you change? Well, we can't change the rules. We need 60. I get a lot of the, you failed civics because we need six. Well, no, you don't. You could vote. You could change the rules. The pressure you should put on would be Manchin and Cinema again, because it's one thing to say we don't want to break the rules to pass legislation without bipartisan support. Fine, I disagree with that, but fine. And most voters disagree with that, as we saw in Ohio. But um, it's another to be like, oh yeah, we've got one senator jeopardizing military preparedness. This rule does not benefit anyone. And it's not one we would ever use, because we would not do that to force a policy position we want. So we should get rid of any rule that is only in our disadvantage. But there's that, nothing's happening. And now, because Schumer has no control over his caucus, um, every Kristen Sinema from the Cinema Party has now said that, um, Biden should try to meet a halfway point on abortion rights with, Tommy Tuberville. Cinema, who, at least occasionally will tweet stuff about how she supports abortion rights, but she's of course selling them out. But, yeah, I mean,
well,
that's.
She only cares about rich people, and it's not really an issue for rich people to have to travel for their reproductive care. So,
That's yeah. I think that is probably what's happening. That's probably the case here. I back to these mini cases. Um, you had alluded to earlier, the Georgia case is far more perilous for Trump. His obvious goal from the start would have been to win election in 2024, pardon himself, or end. He could doesn't have to do it. He could just end if he hasn't been convicted already. Just end all the investigations at the federal level against him. But here, um, these are state charges. One, he has no pardon power, right? Like that was an issue during with the Mueller investigation. Like he was clearly dangling pardons for people, right? And he did pardon people who kept their mouths shut, and then wound up going like Manafort. So he doesn't have that ability. Can you speak to specifically some of the legal stuff against him in Georgia and the rules and why he might actually have to face justice?
yeah, so there are a couple of things that are my real favorites. And the first is that per the Georgia Constitution, the governor does not have pardon power either. So even if Kemp were inclined to issue a pardon, he can't. In Georgia, those decisions are made by a bipartisan, oh, sorry, what's the word I'm thinking of? I want to say parole board, but it's not
The
a
commission.
bipartisan pardon commission. And I believe that in addition to that, it has to be a 2/3 vote in order for someone to be approved for a pardon. And so that's going to be exceedingly difficult to get if in the event that he is convicted. And then, oh, what was my other favorite thing about Georgia law? I had a second.
You have to actually serve the time, right? He has to actually serve. It's more of like allowing. It's not even a real pardon in the magical sense of which card charges go away. It just seems like, oh well, we'll remove this so you can go get a job at Subway. Frankly, right? Like you no longer have that on your record, and you can kind of almost live a normal life. But so, oops for our charging you in the first place. But generally speaking, you would have served at least 5 years, have not committed other crimes during that time. It's very
Right.
hard.
Right. So like the judge would have some discretion for probation for at least some of that if he were found guilty. But again, like there are generally very strict regulations on probation. You know, most people who are thrown back in jail for probation or parole violations, it's for like small technical things. Um, so even if he weren't actually serving time, he would still have those restrictions on him.
Mhm.
Um, and I can't think right now. There was a second thing about Georgia law. I mean, I do appreciate the broadness of their RICO statute. Their racketeering law is actually a little bit broader than the federal statute. Um, but actually, I think that all of these claims were pretty, similar to claims that could be brought in federal court. It just kind of makes the Georgia prosecution that much stronger.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the big complaint and the whine is like that. Oh wait, well they're going to go after Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. It's like, well, okay, well, what crimes? I mean, I'm sure they could try to, if they don't care. I mean, Republicans don't care. They could try to come up with some. Oh, in a border town, and his policies against has caught blah blah blah. But no, no. But specifically in this case, it's like, well, no, he targeted well, one, he committed the crimes, coup attempts in these states, but he targeted specifically areas that, I'm sorry, are run by Democrats or where mostly Democrats live. Just that's why he was trying to overturn the election there. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
You tried to steal Fulton County, so now you are uh, subject to crimes in Fulton County.
Yep. And I did remember the other thing that I like about Georgia law, and it's that most criminal proceedings are televised. And so there will be less opportunity for lying about things that went on, lying and mischaracterizing things that go on in the courtroom, because we should have videos for everyone to see. And that includes a lot of the pretrial stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, Jamie, but in Michigan, a state that was not. We were talking 3 points, you know, hundreds of thousands of votes, and Giuliani is there with Jenna Ellis lying and passing gas on her and all this sort of stuff during hearings, with the full intent of, not just undermining democracy, which of course is bad. You should not do that as a matter of course, but clearly with the intent to disenfranchise millions of people who voted against Trump and did not want, we did all of this. So when Lindsey Graham is like, why they can't defeat him at the ballot, we already defeated him at the ballot box, and he did not go away and try to steal, like he's being charged for stealing. So it's like
Yep.
telling, so I was like, why are you trying to prosecute your ex-husband? Just divorce him. Well, I tried to divorce him and he tried to kill me. So that's why I'm filing these charges against him. Whoopsie. I would have loved if he just left.
Yep. Well, and also these are the same people who said that they didn't vote to convict him in the Senate because that's something for our criminal courts and our courts of law to decide. Funny how now it's supposed to go back again. Courts shouldn't take care of it. It should be at the ballot box. If we take care of it at the ballot box, we're going to say that it should be the courts who decide it. We'll just have it whichever way we want. It's fine.
Absolutely, it's Calvin Ball. And what's frustrating about some of the silence on this is that it's not just about Biden. It's about Fannie Willis. It's about Alvin Bragg. It's about, Jack Smith. He's a white guy, but I still, I don't want him and his family attacked either. And I think the racist vitriol targeted at them, the judge also in the DC case, it's a black woman, is also threats of some. There was someone that was arrested for attempting a threat against her, and I think the president every day should be saying, this person who's my likely opponent is committing stochastic terrorism on a daily basis and witness intimidation or whatever. You probably should call out the crimes. We can't expect to see that from Merrick Garland, who's sort of a profile in spinelessness, but I would expect from the president and from the vice president to be like, no, like I'm going to defend the rule of law, rightly so. And I think, yeah, if the reverse were true, I mean, Republicans would also rightly be making an issue out of this. You talked about January 6th, and if the folks had been the rioters been some other race than white. I had done a review of the 4 Hours at the Capitol's documentary, and a lot of the women who were terrified, like it was some kind of horror movie purge thing where they're like thought that they were going to be killed, raped, but they're women of color. And we know if this was, Black Lives Matter, like something from Birth of the Nation. So Black Lives Matter breaking into the Capitol, and it's predominantly staffers, white women, fearing, hiding under desks. We would one know all their names. They'd be on Fox News every night, and but to me, it's just like I don't know. I don't expect. I know that what Republicans are about. What I expect, and the reason I'm hard on Democrats is like, well, you guys should be out here fighting for me. And that's what frustrates me when Chris Murphy, for instance, is like constantly trying to find some sort of common cause with white guys from his country club, and not, why are you sharing a David Brooks column? There's no Republican who shares columns and Charles Blow columns. Like, I just want to know the other side. No, it's like, and so many of our elected officials they're not doing that. They're not like, oh, here's this Dame magazine article I read about what women are terrified of now that Roe's gone, and I let's talk about this. It's like white guys like, oh well, here's this nice David French column or whatever, or David Brooks column, or whatever the, Matt Iglesias, who apparently is much read in the Biden White House. It's like, so that's what they read and that's what they share. But then they turn around and like, oh, well, Black people, trans people, uh, let queer people, women, please come out and vote for us, but we don't elevate your voices. We don't actually listen to you that much. And
Yep.
it's
Yep. Oh, the Chris Murphy stuff has been driving me crazy because I feel like it's every other day, like some tweet from him ends up in my timeline that's him being like, why don't we just compromise on social justice? It's no big deal. And I'm like, okay, so exactly whose rights do you want to throw under the table when you're saying these things? Just say it.
yeah. Well, it's just
Also,
yeah. Go ahead.
also, like, I'm sorry, but pretty much every vote since Dobbs has shown us how popular abortion rights are. And still, so many Democrats are afraid to embrace and run on that and, be talking about it every day, despite every vote of the people about abortion rights has gone the right way since Dobbs.
No, it only makes sense if you think that they're the Democratic consultants and the people they listen to is all David French, right? Or David Brooks. And so everything's about, or Brett Stevens even. And so everything's about appealing to these men, um, and not even listening to what's popular. Like, yes, like you should be openly pro. Like, there's no reason, includes Nancy Pelosi and who had done this as well. There's no need in supporting any anti-abortion Democratic candidate. Why? There's no gain in that. There's no state. And the reason, and we go back on this, well, what do you gain from it? Because you need to be able to show, and sure, if you want to say the only reason we were to pass the Affordable Care Act is because we had, anti-choice Democrats in these states, specifically at the Senate in Louisiana and Montana, and that's the only way. But the problem is that often you don't have much to show for it. And then it's like everyone's like, well, wait a minute, when we were in charge, why didn't we shore up abortion rights? And then you're saying, well, we didn't have the votes for it. Why don't you know about civics? Because I love those people, but you didn't have the votes for it. It's like, okay, well, then that just seems as if it's not very popular. Do you understand? If you say that when we are in power, we can't do it because we don't have the votes, would imply that what you believe isn't very popular, or that somehow. But I think what comes down to it is that Democrats have trouble accepting that it's not really about those views. It's about Republicans have effectively, especially in rural areas, poisoned their brand. It's sort of like it's not about the Pepsi challenge. If you remember, I'm a little bit older than you, but it's not about the Pepsi challenge of states. It's like, if you went down and into Georgia where I grew up, I spent time. It's not about, hey, well, literally you took the blind test. So you prefer this. I still want Coke because
Yeah.
Coke's my brand. It's not, you're not going to win on the policy issue there. It's like and so time has been going on up close to like 20, almost 30 years where the brand has been poisoned there, the Democratic, and it's not about how you position it or whatever. It's just, no, like you can't sell it on that level. And someone like Chris Murphy is the worst person to try to appeal some country club white guy from, you know, it's not even like some guy who is a working class white guy. It's not the sort of what we say Trey Crowder is the liberal redneck guy who's like, hey, okay, I'm from this world. I'm running as a liberal and I can connect and whatever. He's just trying to, Murphy's just trying to do white dude whispering and then falls in his place. So he's sharing the song from that guy who has just. Did you read the lyrics where he's talking about uh, fat welfare mothers eating bonbons on this? Like, there's no way. Like I said this before, Ted Cruz is horrible, but he is a better politician than a lot of people like Chris Murphy. There's no way Ted Cruz would release, and if his intern did it, that person would be fired at the end of the day. That he's going to release, say, "Hey, let's check out this song by this black rapper." Oh, whoops! I didn't read the whole lyrics. So they talk about how white evangelicals are terrible. Whoops, sorry.
Yeah. Oh,
They,
I'm sure if we search Ted Cruz's timeline, we could even find him like going after Casey Musgraves because, she doesn't hate LGBTQ people and she's a country singer and should
Mhm.
therefore be required to. Like,
they know who they are their voters are, and Republicans are always. I mean, my response to the Murphy thing about, well, I just want to expand our coalition. And it's like, okay, well, for what purpose? And it just reminded me when I lived in New York in my 20s, and I worked with this one lady who was just obsessed with having as many friends as possible, but she didn't really care about who they were, just because that meant you were popular, right? And then she threw this party, and we're kind of like, a coworker and I said, all right, fine, we'll go. We don't really want to go to her party. It's going to be bad. Let we go. And we're there, but it's not enough people are there. So she goes into her room, closes the door, and has a pout while there's like 5 or 6 people who actually did take time out of schedule to show up and feel bad for her and go to her party. So you're like, don't care about us. You're just upset that these other people who clearly don't care about you didn't show up. And it would have been happy. You just wanted like as many people as possible. And that's what I always think of when they talk about expanding the coalition. It's just about, well, what will it matter? Because then it's just sort of, um, as we've discussed, it's sort of the dueling uh battles of this, when I'm told of like, I'm a racist and a sexist for asking if we think that Kamala Harris could win in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, because that's because the electoral college, that's what it comes down to. And as I said, I love Katie Porter, but I'd have the same concern if she were vice president. She's only won in California. She is literally not Joe Biden. An expectation that she is magically Joe Biden isn't really true. And I mean, that's, we can kind of tie things up on that, because the idea is that our basically defense against democracy falling again, because Trump is going to win the election, is our 80 something incumbent president. We need to hold out hope that he can stick through and to win. um I I try not to be ageist. I just think that like I just feel like everyone in the world, whenever they see a loved one in their early 80s, they have different, they're like, oh my goodness, well, there's a little bit of slippage, right? And there's a little bit of like, you're not quite thinking of giving them the most important job in the world. Am I being unfair or?
No, well, so from the voters' perspective, honestly, I think like it's the perception of him being old and feeble that really matters more. Because like, okay, so Liz Warren, I love her. Obviously, she would have trouble with, things if she were the candidate in the general. But she's only like 2 years younger, I think, than Biden. And I would not have the concerns about people being worried about her age, because she doesn't come off um, as the age that she is. And with voters, I do just think that that perception of it is so important. And it is something I worry about, um, because, and some of it is, some of it, I think, some of the criticism I think is unfair. Like, the man has a stutter and he misspeaks sometimes. I don't think that that means that he's declining mentally. But there is a perception issue with that. And that, these are just facts that we have to deal with. We have an important election to win if we're going to try seriously to stop fascism in this country.
Yeah, it does astound me, because I remember, when I was in high school and like, oh, well, we need to help George H.W. Bush. We're going to bring out his more popular boss, Reagan, for something. And you understand, well, he, not that he served 2 terms, but Reagan is getting on up there. That's why he can't run again. But to see that dynamic play with Obama, who's like 60 and looks 50. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, I'll come out of my great retirement and I'll push for the, and you're like, why are you writing again? I understand that you can't, but like literally, like the best guy we have is on the bench always seems bizarre to me. And he's only like 3 years older than Kamala Harris, and we're told is the future of the party. It's like one of those weird things. I'm just like, oh, well, this is so strange. Yeah. Um, and I say this respect to Harris. I've always said when people like, oh, well, the Biden is setting, she was always set up to be the It's like, no, no, she was kind of brought in to be the typical vice president. And if the concern was that Biden was going to kill over or be unable to run, then you probably should have picked Gretchen Whitmer, who had somewhat of a track record of winning in these states, that the ones that matter. Because California, you and I could, as presidential candidates, could carry California. Um, might be close in my case, but it's gonna be called for me. But these are the states that matter, and if you're thinking long term, like that's the way it
Right.
is.
Right. And also someone who has that direct executive level experience running a state too. If your concern is being able to immediately take over the presidency, then that experience can also be
Yeah,
helpful.
but I mean, they could never just sort of do the idea of pretending that, well, he is old, and so I felt like with Obama, with Biden, it was kind of like acknowledging his youth and relative inexperience was fine. It was not trying to pretend that he
Yep.
wasn't 47 years old and had only served a term and a half, right? It was like, no, no, I'm young and I haven't been doing this for a while. And here's my guy who I picked specifically for this and would be a far different choice if I wasn't. And I think with Biden, it's sort of this idea of like, it's a political liability to concede that he is the age he is, and that he, and I know hair supporters say like, no, no, she's being groomed to step in. It's like, well, that's very different. It's just very different to me. That's just not what it's just not what I'm seeing. So, thank you so much for joining us uh, for this chat. As always, it's great to talk to you, Jamie. Where else could we find you on the internets and the world about anything we should also know that you're doing, or something you want to plug for us?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter and all the fake Twitters. Unfortunately, I don't use the regular Twitters or X as much as I used to. But I'm either Jamie Lynn Crofts, Jamie Lynn C, or just Jamie Lynn at pretty much all of the Twitter and fake Twitter platforms. Mostly tweeting about, law, democracy, cats, and binge watching TV shows. So,
Well,
but
thank
we've
you.
got some important work to do here in Wisconsin. So, please, everyone, keep your eyes on these states. They're going to be really, really important as we get into 2024.
Absolutely. It was 20,000 last time. Want to hopefully do as well, if that not better, in 2024. Um, and thank you. This has been a Play Typer Guy podcast. You can download in all the places in a couple weeks, and you can see this on my YouTube channel right now. Presumably, you're watching it. And thanks again. Like, share, subscribe, and thank you, Jamie. We'll have you on again. Take care. Bye bye.